Hi, it's Mark, and did you know that your eye is more responsive to luminosity changes than it is colour? It's true. When you look at a picture, your eyes generally go to the brightest parts, no matter what the colour is. That's why it's very important to get the right mix of lights and darks and tones across your picture. At night, for example, when it starts to get too dark, you stop seeing colour effectively at all, but you will still notice very small changes of luminosity. So to address that, we've been going through a few series of videos looking at contrast and tonal control and luminosity. In our last one, we looked at how the contrast slider was not necessarily our friend, but we could use it to point out where we needed to apply contrast and where we needed to take contrast away. And then we used other methods to do that. I will link to that video there now, so you can go and watch that later. And we're developing that technique today by looking at tone curves. I'll teach you all about how to use the tone curve, and again, this can be more effective local rather than global, so we'll see how we can use this within our masking. What we're going to be working on are these mediocre, and that's being polite, these 4 mediocre pictures. I'll just move me out of the way so you can see them in all their heavenly glory. Theatre Royal Lights at Grey Street, Blackfriars Square, overexposed and underexposed, too much sky going on, lost from this picture, and Stage Door. I would have normally thrown these out if I was going through cherry picking my film strip, but I've kept them because they're an editing challenge, and they're all sitting in a zip file on my website, and the link is downstairs in the doobly-doo. If you want to go and pause me, click on that link, get these pictures loaded in Lightroom, get yourself a cup of coffee, unpause me, I'll play the titles. You will have clicked on the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified of all future releases, and as and when you get a few minutes in and you think this is worth it, please give this a like, because likes get noticed by YouTube, and then my videos get in front of more people, and that inspires me to actually create more content for you. It's a vicious circle. Cue the credits. So starting with the Stage Door picture, let's just click on Auto. Great place to start, and it's done a very good job of getting rid of some of the more immediate troublesome areas, such as how much that was blown out on the left. But I do like the contrast that's going on here, and I do like this shadow here, which we will accentuate in a minute. But let's have a look at the tone curve. Over here you've got highlights, shadows, whites and blacks. They're tones, and they obviously alter the highlight areas, the shadows, the whites and blacks. So isn't that your tone curve? So if I bring it down here, I'm bringing down the mids. If I bring it down here, I'm bringing down the blacks. If I bring it down here, I'm bringing down the whites. If I bring it here, I'm bringing up the whites, up the mids, and so on. Isn't that the same? Right click, reset all. Yes and no. What we've got here in the top panel, these are equivalent of bass and treble in the audio world, and in your hi-fi or whatever. They have boundaries within which they operate. Down in the tone curve, on this point curve, the second one in, we'll cover the others in a minute, I put in as many points as I care to put in. That's probably a lie. There's probably a limit of about 100 or 1,000, whatever. I don't know what the limit is. But in putting points in, I've now divided that up, and I could choose just to bring that band down or up. So this is the band which is largely in the lighter tones of the pinks and such over here, rather than the whole sweeping highlight area. So that is now our graphic equalizer, where the bass responses are here, the mids are here, and the trebles are here. You've now been able to divide it up into lots of little bits. So the tone curve, the point curve on the tone curve, is like a graphic equalizer. It allows us to really band up those tones and make subtle alterations. By itself, that might not be as useful on some pictures as a global edit, although it has done something nice here with the pinks in there, and is probably more efficient under a localized adjustment. but we'll get there. But that's essentially what the points do. Let's clear them all off. Why is it called a curve? Well, if I just take a generic middle tone and I darken it, you can see the impact on the picture, but notice how it tries to maintain a nice fluid curve. It tries to join the dots like so. So if I had this one up here to bring the highlights up, for example, and down here I click for another one to bring the darks down, that's kind of your traditional S curve. In fact, if we come down here to where it says point curve and we choose what Adobe thinks is a medium contrast, it's done a similar thing. There's a slight bowing up there and a slight bowing down here. That is also an S type curve. Let's have a look at the strong contrast, and you can see that one nudged higher and that one came down again. So that's what Adobe thinks should be a strong contrast on this particular picture. But it's built of points, and as you move them, it tries to maintain the curve. So if I move this one up, you'll see this one come down on the right side of that ever so slightly. So adding extra points can constrain that unwanted motion higher and lower on your points. So it's very useful in that regard. Clear them out again. And we do exactly the same thing with colors. So this will impact the darks, the mids and the highlights of the colors. You've got red opposite cyan. So if I move this ever so slightly into cyan from the midtones, it will take away the red. So if you watch the red in the picture, it starts to take away the red. I've only moved that a tiny bit and it's already taken the reds out. If I were to move it the tiniest bit into the reds, it would take the cyan out. So I think of these as opposites. So cyan removes the red, red removes the cyan. However, if you go a little bit further into the cyan, you can forget about reds, you're just adding cyan. If you go a little bit further into the reds, you can forget about removing cyan, you're just piling on the reds. So this is very subtle and can be used to alter individual elements of tones within colors, but red and cyan. And again, you can do it within the darks. So if down here I'm going to the reds, if you look at the shadows on the pavement, they're starting to pick up a bit of red in them or a bit of cyan in them. If we try and reset the channel, try the greens are opposite magenta. We've seen those two colors in partnership before. I'll come back to that. So again, if I come down into magenta, I'm going to start removing greens from this picture. But if I keep going, I'm just piling on the magenta. If I go up, I'm going to remove magenta from this picture, but I'm going to pile on the greens. And again, I can do it within the various bands from shadows through to lights, and I can put points in so that can restrict the onward cascade of that curve. Blues, blue and yellow, we've seen those pairings before as well. Again, if I want to bring more yellows into the midtones, I can bring this down, but it's also taking out the blues. And if I keep going, it starts just washing with yellow. If I go up, it takes out yellow, and if I keep going, it starts to wash with blue. Where have we seen those before? In our basics panel, when you're doing white balance, blues at one end, yellows at the other. So we've seen that pairing before. It's where we actually start to set our temperature, cool to warm on a picture. Well, think of that. If you're doing that with your white balance and you want to warm up a picture, ask yourself, do I want to warm the whole thing, or do I just want to warm the shadows? If I want to warm the shadows, tone curve. Stick a few points on to restrict that, come down to the shadow end of this blue and start to bring the yellows in here. Warm those shadows. You've also got a tint on your white balance as well between green and magenta. That's where we saw the offset between green and magenta. So the point curve and the color channels all do the same thing in terms of how you divide them up, how you can move them up and down to increase or decrease that tone. Incidentally, I'll reset everything. The black point and the white point should not be forgotten. They're not just anchor points. If you move the black point to the right, you are raising the black point, so more parts of that picture fall into what Adobe will class or Lightroom will class as black, and you can see the whole thing starts to darken from the ground up, literally. Also, if you bring this down, the whole thing starts to, sorry, if you bring this across, the whole thing starts to brighten from the top down. What about the other directions? Well, here we saw it resets the dark point, making it more black further into all the tones. Well, if you lift it up, it lightens the black point, so there is nothing there on that picture that is black anymore. Everything is just a little bit more than black. So you can get more of a washed out look. This can be good for effects for aging pictures, for example. Similarly with the whites, we saw if we bring it in, we're crushing the whites down, making more things white. But if we bring this down, we're removing the white as being the highest point anyway. There's nothing on this picture now that is white. It may look white, it's getting close to, but we've taken the white all the way down. Incidentally, as an aside, if you swap black and white around, you get a negative. There you go. Can Lightroom make negatives? Yes, it can. If you scan in a negative picture and you want to do a quick conversion back to color, put it in Lightroom and swap the tone curves around. Bring that one all the way down, bring that up, and there's your negative from a slide from old film photography already into a positive. Right, moving on. This one is called the parametric curve. You can't put points on per se, it's already got defined bands. If you can see the lozenge there, that's the highlights, and it's reflected on this slider here. If I come down, that is light, but notice light encapsulates highlights. Next we come down, we've got darks, and next down we've got shadows, and notice that darks encapsulates shadows. In fact, darks encapsulates on this picture lights. Doesn't quite touch shadow, the highlights, but these overlap. The Venn diagrams, these overlap. So this is like having your tone controls of bass and treble widened out, so they do literally impact each other a bit, and you can get some decent tonal controls over these by using these banding. And you'll see that we can't go outside of that lozenge. If I go to negative 100 and positive 100, that's already predefined in there, as is the darks and all the other bands. The range of the bands can be altered, and I've not found a good use case for this yet, but you can alter them here. So currently the highlights up here are more or less constrained by this marker. So if I push that marker right up, then the highlights get more flattened in there. I can bring everything up ridiculously. So now when we alter the shadows, it's virtually all of the picture because it's right up to there. And now if I alter the highlights, it's only the tiny little bit at the top because I've altered those bandings. As I say, I've not found a good use case for that yet, but that's what they do. Reset regions and splits. So that's the gist of this. Now we shall go and have a play with this, because I want to do this locally on some of the other pictures. But for now, let's just continue the edit on here. I said I wanted to increase the shadow which comes along here, so I've chose local adjustment, linear gradient. I'm going to click here and drag up, mirroring the shadow that's already there, and I'm going to take the exposure down a little bit more wide, take the exposure down a bit more, really darken that off. But I want to maintain the whites of the woodwork, so I don't need a separate mask for that, because highlights are far further upstream to exposure, so I can probably get away with just putting whites in now, and it won't necessarily impact the negative exposure I've put in. Possibly bring the blacks down a little bit, just a little bit, and highlights up, just to accentuate the white woodwork within that negative bit I've put in. I also want to pick out some more of the texture and highlights in the path. Now I can probably do that more easily with texture. Texture is a contrast of clarity. Clarity is a contrast of texture. So if I bring this up, it should, and it has on the path, look, it's picking up bits of the path. I'm making that a bit brighter, that line coming across, so I'm quite happy with that. What about tone curve? Right, I fell foul of this the very first time I did tone curves as a local adjustment, because this was not open, it was closed. So I came here and I set myself something to adjust. So for the sake of argument, let us put a luminosity range in on the very highlights of this picture. And now I want to go and alter the tone curve. I came down, there's the tone curve, and I start to play with it. And I thought, well, why is it doing that? I'll switch my overlay off with the O for overlay. Why is it doing that the whole picture and not just the bits I've chosen? Because I was just seeing the words tone curve. I didn't realize, I'll reset that, I didn't realize I'd run off the end of this panel because my curve was closed. So the tone curves you're looking for, these aren't the curves you're looking for. The tone curve you're looking for is within this grey panel when you've got local adjustment. So here we are, we've done this on our overlay, which is all the highlights. They're a bit too yellow, so I've chose the blue channel, and I'm just going to take the midground and just move it up slightly into the blue just to make it a little bit more pink, possibly a little bit higher, and then bring that down a little bit there. Very subtle before and after. There's a little bit of a blue coming into those highlights on the bricks. There you are. In an ideal world, they might all have been closed up and I would have got it straight away. Okay, so that is an introduction to the tone curve, what the various points are, how you start to look at it within a local adjustment brush. Let's jump on to another image. We'll do the theatre oil and we'll see where we go with that. I'm interested to see how much blue and yellow there actually is in this picture, so let us have a quick look at the blues. Some nice blues in the sky and some nice yellows in the building, but the sky is bright and the buildings are dark. So let's have a look at that tone curve, because that fits the bill. If we go to the blue channel and I want to put some of the yellows into the buildings, I'll just put a few anchor points in, and I'm going to pull that down to introduce a little bit more yellow into the buildings, and by putting this up I can put some blues into the top. In fact, I think I'll bring the blue point just up a tiny bit. Now this won't become too apparent yet. This is like underpainting before I go back into my regular edit here, which I think I want to bring the highlights down a bit more because I want to make this more of a night scene. I've decided shadows up a little bit because that'll pick out those yellows we've just put in. Whites, let's just find my white point, and as per my previous video, one of the ways you can do this is to hold down the Alt or Option key while you slide the white point. Where it starts to break through, that is now blown out. There's no information left in there at all, as you can see. Hold my Option or Alt key still down and I'll just back it off till it disappears, and with black it's where you start to see blue and darker colours come in that you've lost all information because it's pure black, so a little bit of that's okay. Right, having said that, I think a little bit down with the exposure a little bit more, and let's put some lights in this lamps. So let's jump into a local adjustment brush. I think, yes, we'll make my brush a bit smaller with my left hand bracket key. Auto mask on, and I'm just going to come down inside each of these. I'm not fussed that I'm slightly going over the completely going over the vertical bars on that, because what I'm going to do is bring up exposure a little bit, which won't brighten black anyway, but I want to put some yellow in there. So let's go and adjust the temperature. Whoops. So let's just open up color and put some yellow in there, and a bit of clarity as well, I think, which is under detail. No, it's not. They've put it under effects. Okay, that's the first stage of that. Now I'm going to put some radial gradients on, just to cook the middle. And again, a bit of exposure, or even whites, and a bit more yellow in there. Take that white point up as well. and I'll copy that or duplicate it, and I'll make it a bit smaller, and put it into that one. Then I'll duplicate that again, make it a bit smaller, and I won't bother on the last one, but I do want to redo this one, or rather duplicate it again, and on the duplicate make it not quite as bright on that one. Okay, so that's where we are with lighting those up. Now the light would also shine against bits of the building here, so let's create a brush and bring the flow and opacity way down, well, 65-ish%. Auto mask, I'm not really fussed whether auto mask's on or not, and I'm just going to brush down the side of that panel there for now, and let's increase exposure just a little bit on there and put some yellow in, because that's the colour that's coming off that light. A little bit more down here and little bits in here as those lights are catching them on the way down. Now that's overall a bit too strong, but the beauty of doing effects like this is you can always have a roll off of the full effect. Here we've got this, so even though I've added yellows and exposure, this actually rolls them both back at the same time. So I take that back down to there, and so that one, just the before and after. A little bit too much here, so I'll hold my Option key or Alt key, it becomes a negative sign, and I'll just brush it out there and out there as well. Okay, so we've added some light to that. If you wanted to, you go and put the odd bit of light in some of the windows as well, but I'm going to darken that sky a little bit more, I think. So let's just select sky. I just take a little bit more exposure out of the sky, and I want to brighten the side of this pillar in general, I think, because there's a lot of lovely definition in there. So I'll put a linear gradient, I'll drag it across like so, and I'll just bring up the shadows a little bit on there, effective, so you can still see our highlight that we put in, which was that one, and possibly some clarity as well. There you go. Crop, because I don't want the roofs of the cars there, so R to recrop, bring that up, possibly bring that down just a touch. Does it need straightening? Possibly a tiny bit. There we go. And I'll leave it like that. So before and after with our backslash key. We've added some lights, but we put our first color cast in using the blue and yellow to see that showed us there was blues in the sky, and the yellow showed us the yellows in there. So we used a tone curve and we separated them between the darks by pulling the blue channel down, which brought yellow in, and in the highlights in the sky we pushed up the yellow, which brought blue in. Let's have a look at the next picture. Okay, so what I want to do with this recrop for starters, and bring this down a little bit, straighten it just a hair. Now I want to try and do something here, so I'm just going to press auto and see what it does. And that's not a bad job for the outside, but I prefer the inside still being quite dark. So I'm going to put a mask on here, and I'm going to select background. I'm hoping the background will be the background. There it is. It's recognized that's a subject, but it's got all this in here. So I'm going to subtract with my brush, make my brush a bit bigger. I'm just going to bring that out, get rid of that, get the flow and density back up again. Not really interested in anything going on out there for now. And then I'm just going to bring my exposure down. I like the darkness in there. In fact, I like the fact that the start to see the stone, but I don't want to see it right at the edges. So what I'll do is I'll just slap a few radial gradients on, linear gradients on. Just bring them in like that and take the exposure down. And another. and take the exposure down. There we are. I'm more pleased with that. Now, as for doing something in the middle here, let me close that and go back to our tone point curve and use our selector tool, and I want to bring this slate down a bit, so I think I'll bring that's my reference point. I was thinking that represents all of the paths, so I could easily have picked another piece, but I didn't want to make this even more yellow in doing so. So what I'll do is I'll go to the blue channel. I've still got my reference point. I'll put it on, oops, I have my reference point, I put it away, I've got it out again now. I'll click on there and I'm going to move up, which takes me into the blue. So it's taking that yellow out, as you can see, and less is very much more. So I just want to nudge that up just a little bit. So without the tone curve, we've got before and after. And I think I'm quite pleased with that. Here we've just used this very subtly, just to alter some of the tones in the brickwork. And here, by clicking on the reference point of what to my eye represented a lot of the path, just picked a piece in there and pulled that down. Okay, let's move on to the next and final picture for now. And with this picture, I think we've actually run out of time, guys. It's we're on to half an hour now. Some of my videos do tend to stretch out, but I do like to walk through things, unpick the knitting, show different options of how to do things. I would hate to do a video where I just come on and say A, B, C, D, goodbye. I don't think you learn as much as finding our way through some of these jointly with you copying along with the sample images. So I'm going to leave this here. Let me know how you get on with this particular image, and the challenge is that's a difficult sky to recover. Let's just quickly see what auto does, and highlights down some more, bring some of the shadows down. No, we're going to have to be looking at whites, exposures, clarities and such to fix that sky. Right, I'm out here until the next one. Don't forget that subscribe button. Give it some bashing. Well, just bash it once. If you bash it a second time, you unsubscribe. As long as you give it an even amount of bashing, ultimately you'll be subscribed. I'm gone. Bye now.